Chapter 1. The Numbers That Didn't Add Up. I knew something was wrong the moment I saw the same $28,700 vanish for the 15th month in a row. But nothing prepared me for what came next. A junior accountant sneaking into the office at 2 in the morning, her hands shaking while she entered numbers she was too afraid to explain. A system that kicked me out the second I uncovered a deleted email tying our CFO to a secret plan to inflate the company's value before a multi-million-dollar sale. And me, Elena Reyes, a forensic accountant who only wanted a quiet life, suddenly realizing that someone inside Ridgeline Freight was watching every move I made. By the time the audit team walked in and the FBI followed them through the door, it was already too late for anyone to pretend the truth wasn't there. This is how I found the trail they tried to bury. I had been staring at quarterly ledgers for 12 years, long enough to recognize the faint shiver that crawled along my spine whenever numbers tried to lie to me. That morning in early February of 2025, inside my small office on the 4th floor of Ridgeline Freight Corporation in Boise, the familiar chill hit before I even understood why. I just sat there, coffee cooling beside my keyboard, and felt something tighten behind my ribs, as though my instincts had reached out and tapped my shoulder. I clicked back to the top of the February financial feed and began again, line by line, the same ritual I had performed since joining the company in 2020, after leaving a big audit firm in Seattle. I had told myself I wanted quiet work in a quieter city. Instead, I found a number that refused to stay quiet. 28,700. It sat there, under administrative offset, a category that typically handled petty adjustments like vendor credits or small internal reassignments. Nothing even close to this. I highlighted it and scrolled down. My pulse thudded slowly, as if bracing for something it had felt before my mind did. Then I opened the ledger history and began clicking backward. January, December, November. The same number repeated. I kept going until I hit November of 2023. 15 straight months. At first, I thought maybe our software was duplicating an entry. That happened once back in 2021 when an update crashed mid-process. But a duplication would not be this consistent, and no duplication would spread across different cost centers the way these entries were. Someone had deliberately repositioned the offset each month, as if trying to camouflage it. Whoever did it had enough access and enough nerve to think no one would ever connect the dots. They had not counted on me. I leaned back and let out a slow breath. I was 39 and I like to believe I was calmer than I had been in my 20s, but there was nothing calming about a monthly disappearance of nearly $30,000 in a company that prided itself on clean books and conservative operations. Ridgeline Freight was not a glossy coastal tech firm. It was a logistics network with trucks, warehouses, and margins tight enough to squeak. Money did not simply evaporate without someone noticing, except here I was, noticing alone. Brad Kingston was already pacing near the copier when I walked over. He managed the accounts team and usually greeted me with a weary smile, the kind someone wears after years stuck between upper management and reality. That morning, he looked as though he had not slept at all. I waited until the copier spat out his last page, then cleared my throat. "Brad, can you look at something for me? Administrative offset. Again." He stiffened almost invisibly, which was enough because Brad was not a man who stiffened. He cleared his throat, shuffled a few pages, and avoided my eyes. "Probably nothing, Elena. I would leave it. Valerie is handling review. Just keep your focus on the year-end recon." His voice trembled faintly as he spoke, and that told me everything. Brad was a rule follower. If he brushed me off, it was not because he believed what he was saying. It was because someone had already told him to brush me off. Valerie Hartzell, our interim chief financial officer, had been increasingly protective of certain accounts since early fall. Every seasoned accountant at Ridgeline Freight had noticed. No one dared mention it. I went back to my office and pulled up approval logs. Sure enough, every questionable transaction had been signed off by Valerie late at night or on Saturday evenings. That alone did not prove wrongdoing, but my gut spoke louder than any policy manual. Around lunchtime, I remembered the security logs. Every transaction review left a digital footprint keyed to the device, time, and user. Our IT system recorded employee badge entries and office door activity. I requested the clip. The footage loaded slowly on my laptop. When it sharpened, I saw a familiar figure hurry into the accounting suite at 2 in the morning. She moved stiffly, kept her head down, and approached the workstation closest to the file room. It was Emily Wade, the junior accountant I had been mentoring since August. 26, bright, soft-spoken, desperate to prove herself. In the grainy footage, she looked nothing like the polite young woman who baked lemon bars for the team during busy season. She appeared scared, glancing around before logging in. Her hands shook. She submitted something quickly, logged out, and almost ran out of the office. I felt my stomach sink. Emily had no reason to be in the building that late. She did not have the authority to make adjustments over $10,000. Either someone used her login or forced her to make the entries. The next morning, Emily sent a brief message saying she needed to take 3 days off to help her mother, who had suddenly fallen ill. Her words were calm, but the timing was not. I called once, no answer. I texted her to check in. The response contained only a thank you and a promise to return Monday. It felt like a goodbye disguised as reassurance. I turned off the lights in my office and sat in the gray quiet. Outside, the February sky pressed down like wet paper, soft and cold, threatening snow. I knew better than to chase suspicions without evidence. My years in forensic accounting had taught me that suspicion was an emotion, not a case. I needed proof. I began extracting everything from the system while I still had full access. Ledgers, logs, screenshots, audit trails, timestamps. I copied each file to a personal encrypted drive that I kept locked in my desk safe. I was not stealing anything. I was preserving data that could vanish in a single keystroke. I paused only when the software flagged the 15th identical offset. 15 months, each one tied to a different project code. 15 chances for someone to bury their tracks. Whoever crafted this believed no one would ever compare all 15. They were wrong. It was late when I finally shut down my computer. Most of the office had already emptied. The cleaning crew clattered somewhere down the hall. The hum of the ventilation system echoed softly, the only sound accompanying my thoughts. I walked to the window and pressed my hand to the cool glass. The view stretched across the city and out towards the faint blue silhouettes of the Boise front foothills, the gateway to the Rockies. Dusk curled around the peaks, turning them dark against the fading sky. Snow flurries drifted like static above the streetlights. I watched the mountains and wondered what exactly was hidden behind $28,700. Was it sloppiness? Was it fear? Was it greed? Or was it something larger, something designed, something that had been moving beneath our feet long before I noticed its shadow on the ledger? That thought settled heavily inside me. I knew I wouldn't sleep that night. I also knew this was only the beginning.
Chapter 2: The Hidden Trail Under the Ledger. I drove home through light flurries that smeared against the windshield like pale brushstrokes. Boise looked softer at night, quiet, almost protective. But I felt none of that comfort when I pulled into my garage. The kind of unease that comes from a pattern you cannot unsee stayed lodged under my ribs as I walked inside. I set my bag on the kitchen counter, kicked off my shoes, and powered up my personal laptop. My living room was dim except for the glow from the screen, and the silence felt thick enough to press against my ears. I opened the files I had copied earlier and began tracing the trail of the money the way I had been trained to do back in my forensic accounting days. The offsets were identical on the ledger, but the outgoing transfers told a different story. Each month, the $28,700 was broken up into 4 payments routed to vendors I had never seen before. The name sounded legitimate at first glance.
the kind of generic service company small operations might use. I searched each one anyway. None had a website. None had a physical office. The listed addresses were P.O. boxes in Oregon and Utah. The state records showed nothing more than shell registrations. I leaned closer to the screen and inhaled slowly. Someone had built a network of empty vendors with enough sophistication to bypass normal approval checks. That took planning. That took motive. I ran the transactions again, checking the routing numbers. All 4 accounts shared the same initial bank registration window in early 2023. That was months before the first suspicious offset. Whoever set this up had been laying groundwork long before the money began leaving Ridgeline. My phone vibrated with the notification. I ignored it. Hours slid by as I followed each thread, mapping dates, amounts, and shifts in project codes. The pattern was deliberate. The hides were deliberate. Every piece of it told me that whatever I had stepped into was larger than 1 or 2 misclassified entries. This was architecture. By the time I shut my laptop, my back ached from leaning forward. I forced myself to breathe. There was a team meeting in the morning, and I needed at least some sleep. But my mind kept spinning through each entry like a machine that refused to power down. And it took a long time before exhaustion finally pulled me under. The meeting room the next day smelled of dry erase markers and burnt coffee. Everyone murmured quietly while setting up their laptops. Valerie arrived last, a stack of folders in her arms. She placed them on the table with practiced precision and began outlining month-end tasks. Her tone was clipped and focused, and no one dared interrupt her rhythm. When there was a pause, I raised my hand slightly. I kept my voice steady. I need clarification on the administrative offset entries that have been repeating for over a year. Before I could finish, Valerie's hand sliced through the air. Not relevant to this meeting. We are behind on quarter close, and this team needs to stay focused on the tasks assigned. Finish the reconciliation reports by Friday. That is the priority. Her gaze swept the table like a warning. The room fell silent. Even the clicking of keyboards stopped. It was the kind of silence that had weight, a silence that told you a line had been drawn, and that questioning it was dangerous. After the meeting, I was packing my notes when Brad approached. His face looked drawn, and he kept his voice low. "Elena, please, drop whatever you are digging into. Some things are not meant for us." His eyes flicked toward Valerie's closed office door. "Just stay clear. That is the best advice I can give." He stepped back before I could ask anything. He looked pale, almost sick. I realized he was scared, and Brad did not frighten easily. That alone should have been enough to make me walk away, but it had the opposite effect. Back at my desk, I tried to call Emily. No answer. I sent a message asking if she was all right. A few minutes passed before she responded with a shaky line saying she could talk on video. I accepted immediately. Her face filled my screen. She looked exhausted, eyes red and puffy, as if she had cried. Her hair was pulled back messily, and she kept glancing off to the side. "Emily, what happened the night you were in the office?" Her breath hitched, and she shook her head. "I can't talk about this. Not like this." Someone knocked on a door somewhere behind her. She startled so violently, I felt it through the screen. "Emily, listen to me. If someone is forcing you to do something..." She cut the call without another word. The screen went dark. I stared at it, stunned. until my heart began to pound with slow dread. Someone had frightened her into silence. I returned to the ledger files. Something told me not to stop. I accessed the deleted email repository using my forensic credentials. The system blinked, hesitated, then revealed a thread that had been manually wiped earlier that week. My pulse quickened as I scanned the recovered content. It was a message from Valerie to a financial consultant in Portland. The language was careful, but the meaning was unmistakable. She referenced adjusting numbers to align with target valuations ahead of the August 2025 acquisition. The consultant assured her that early suppression of certain variances was normal and advised maintaining consistency until the merger negotiations finalized. I sat back stunned. This was no clerical cleanup. This was a coordinated effort to inflate corporate value. The fraudulent offsets were helping to mask cash discrepancies, pushing Ridgeline into a more attractive position for a potential buyer. Later that afternoon, an email from the chief executive, Michael Carr, hit everyone's inbox. He announced that February's books would be closed within the next 48 hours, despite pending discrepancies. No exceptions. He emphasized urgency and asked everyone to prioritize speed. That had never happened before. Ridgeline had always been painfully meticulous about month-end accuracy. It was one of the reasons I joined the company in the first place. The sudden shift in philosophy was too abrupt to be coincidence. I returned to the financial feed to check one of the older entries. Before the screen could load, it flashed white. Then I was logged out completely. I tried again. The system rejected me. My credentials had worked minutes ago. Now they did not. I tried another access point, a different portal. Same result. Someone had revoked my permissions. My body tensed from head to foot. I whispered under my breath, as if saying the words would make them frightening. Someone knows I saw the email. I sat frozen for several seconds. Then I took a long, steady breath and logged into my offline archive. I recalculated the total loss across 15 months, $400,650. That was only the obvious layer, the layer visible to anyone who cared enough to check. But given what I had already uncovered, it was likely that there was more beneath the surface. The kind of more that could end careers. And maybe worse. I stared at the numbers until they blurred. There was a cold feeling inside me, colder than the February air pressing against the window. I sensed that two things were now true. Someone had been hiding money for a long time, and someone else had just realized that I was the one who finally noticed. I closed the files and rested my hands on the desk. My apartment was quiet again, quiet in a way that made the walls seem closer. I tried to picture what the next day would bring. I could not. The only thing I knew for certain was that the $400,000 I had traced was only the beginning. The real danger lived in everything I had not yet found. If this story touched you, please subscribe and let someone out there feel less alone. Thank you. Chapter 3: When Patterns Become Proof. I reached a point where staring at my offline archive felt like sitting beside a ticking clock. I knew I needed more than instinct and fragmented evidence. I needed someone who understood Ridgeline's systems deeply enough to uncover what had been buried. That meant talking to Daniel Brooks. Daniel worked in a small office tucked behind the server room on the third floor. He was 35, quiet to the point that people sometimes forgot he was in the room, but he carried a sharpness behind his eyes that made you think twice before underestimating him. I headed down to see him first thing the next morning, long before Valerie or the senior managers arrived. He looked up from his keyboard when I stepped into his doorway. "Elena, should I be worried you are here before sunrise?" "I need your help," I said, "and I need you to promise you will not mention this to anyone." Daniel leaned back slightly, studying me with a seriousness I had only seen once before, the day he testified in an internal review and 2 senior accountants were let go. "What did you find?" he asked. "Not enough to accuse anyone," I said, "but enough to know something is wrong. I saw 15 months of identical offsets routed through shell vendors, and last night, someone revoked my access." He scrubbed his hand over his jaw. "That is not normal, not even for this place." "I know. I need the deleted logs and anything hidden under administrator settings, whatever has been wiped intentionally." He hesitated, then nodded. "I will see what I can restore. But Elena, you should know. 2 people from finance have been fired for asking questions like that. You remember Marcus in 2021? And Laura the year after? They saw things too." "I am not backing away," I said. "Not this time." His expression shifted. A soft exhale. "All right. Email me the date range. I will run it quietly." I sent the information and returned to my desk, nerves stretched thin. It was nearly noon when Daniel messaged asking me to come back down. I went immediately. He closed the door behind me and turned his monitor so I could see. On the screen was a wall of activity logs, each marked with the same user credentials, Valerie's. But the timestamps were wrong. Some entries showed adjustments made at times that contradicted badge records. Others had time zones mismatched, jumping between Mountain and Central Time as if the software had been manually overridden. Daniel pointed to a cluster of entries. "These should align with system defaults, but look at the timestamps. 46 entries show the wrong zone. Someone altered them using the internal dev tool. Only a handful of people have that access, and most of them are not in finance." I swallowed hard. So whoever did this knew enough to change the timestamps, but not enough to adjust the time zone setting. Daniel nodded. "Sloppy work. Or rushed. Either way, it tells us the entries were manipulated manually." I stared at the fractured string of logs, feeling a slow heat building in my chest. Not anger, something sharper. Certainty. Before I could respond, my phone buzzed. Emily. The screen showed her name trembling above an incoming call. I stepped into the hallway to answer. Her voice arrived broken, like she had been crying for hours. "Elena, I cannot keep doing this. I cannot." "Emily, what did Valerie make you do?" I asked softly. Silence. A shaky breath, then the dam broke. "She told me to adjust those offsets. She told me if I did not do it, I would never work in finance again. She said this industry is small and she knows people in every firm in the region. She said she would ruin my career before it even started." My grip tightened on the phone. "Emily, listen to me. You're not alone in this. You need to tell me exactly what she asked you to do." She gave me a script. She told me what numbers to enter and which reports to reroute. She said it was temporary and that the company needed things to look stable until the merger. I believed her at first, but when I said I was uncomfortable, she told me it was too late and that backing out would only make things worse. My heart clenched at the desperation in her voice. "You did nothing wrong," I said. "You were coerced." There was a sudden knock on her end. Hard. She gasped. "I have to go," she whispered. "Emily, wait!" But the line went dead. I stood frozen in the hallway, my thoughts racing. The fear in her voice was unmistakable. Valerie was tightening her grip on everyone around her, using threats as currency. I headed back to Daniel's office, but he was already standing in the doorway with another file open. "I found something else," he said. "An email draft saved in Valerie's folder, but never sent. You need to see this." We sat in front of his monitor. The draft laid out a strategy to reroute internal funds across multiple fiscal periods to inflate Ridgeline's earnings before the August 2025 sale. It referenced projected buyer interest, targeted valuation ranges, and the expectation that certain irregularities would be absorbed post-acquisition. My stomach twisted. This wasn't just financial misclassification. This was laundering money through structured internal transactions. This was fraud. Daniel pointed at the bottom of the screen. "That total right there? $1.32 million. That's the full amount she's moved through this network." The number made something in me go cold. I felt faintly ill, like the truth was too large to fit inside my mind at once. "How long have you known something was wrong?" I asked quietly. Daniel looked away, eyes tightening. "Since Marcus got fired. He found a small discrepancy in 2021. He mentioned it to me. A week later, HR eliminated his role. I learned to keep my head down, but I didn't forget." I let the weight of that sink in. Silence spread between us like a slow-moving tide. When I finally spoke, my voice felt distant. I left a big audit firm in Seattle because they wanted me to ignore things like this. They called it business pragmatism, but it felt like betrayal. I won't go back to being the person who looks away. He nodded. "Then you should protect yourself. And soon." Later that afternoon, Brad texted asking to meet behind the building. I hesitated, then went. The air was freezing and the parking lot buzzed with the hum of distant traffic. Brad stood beside his car, hands shoved deep in his coat. His voice trembled when he spoke. "Elena, I need you to stop. Valerie is preparing to remove you from the system entirely. She says you are asking the wrong questions." "I am asking the right questions. That is exactly why she wants you gone. I'm not saying you're wrong. I'm saying she will bury you if she thinks you can expose her. Please, walk away before she does something irreversible." I held his gaze. "I cannot." He closed his eyes briefly. "Then at least be careful." He walked away without another word, leaving me alone in the cold with the truth echoing in my chest. Valerie was coming for me. Back at home that night, I stared at the ceiling for a long time before finally getting up. I retrieved the encrypted drive from my bag and connected it to my laptop. I needed to prepare, not panic. I organized every file into 3 complete sets. I labeled them in a code only I would recognize. One set stayed on my personal drive at home. The second I copied onto a flash drive that I would give to Daniel at work the next day. The third I saved onto a separate drive and locked inside my office safe at Ridgeline, hidden inside an old binder from my onboarding paperwork. When it was done, I sat at my dining table, lit only by the glow of a small lamp, and let out a long, shaky breath. I had proof now. Real proof. Enough to threaten a sale worth millions. Enough to end Valerie's career. Enough to put me in danger if I wasn't careful. I closed my laptop and stared into the darkness of my quiet apartment, knowing that from this point forward, everything I did would matter. I had stepped across a line that I could not return from, and I could feel the ground shifting beneath me as I realized the storm was only beginning to take shape. Chapter 4. The Power Games Inside Closed Doors. I woke up the next morning with that same tightness in my chest, the one that sits there before the world decides to shift again. When I walked into Ridgeline's lobby, the air already felt strange, charged in a way I could not name until I saw the email announcement flashing across every screen in the building. The parent company in Chicago would be sending an internal audit team to Boise in 14 days. Mandatory review, full scope examination, all departments to prepare. There are moments in corporate life when entire hallways feel like they inhale at once. This was one of them. People whispered near the elevators, eyes darting nervously toward the finance wing. Everyone knew our books were usually clean. Everyone also knew something had been off for months, even if they pretended not to see it. I had not even reached my desk when Valerie called for an emergency meeting. She stood at the front of the conference room, arms crossed, jaw tight. Behind her, the blinds were half drawn, cutting sharp stripes of daylight across her face. "We need to realign financial statements before the audit begins," she said. "Some reports from the past 15 months contain inconsistencies that must be corrected to reflect the company's current performance. This is standard. We are not discussing any of it outside this room. Understood?" No one moved. My hands curled around my notebook. Realign was a word that sounded harmless to most people. To a forensic accountant, it meant redo evidence. It meant wipe footprints. It meant bury whatever should not exist. She continued outlining tasks, assigning sections to each team member. When she named mine, something odd happened. The spreadsheet I was assigned had nothing to do with offsets or reconciliations. It was a random project ledger from a warehouse division I had never handled. My stomach dropped. She was deliberately pulling me away from the financial core. When the meeting ended, I returned to my computer and logged in. Or tried to. The system rejected my password. I tried again. Invalid. I clicked the module access icon. Restricted. I tried the internal routing network. Restricted. The entire accounting infrastructure was locked to me. A new email notification popped up from Valerie. "Elena, effective immediately, you are temporarily reassigned to the project management support group. You will remain there until the audit concludes." I stared at the screen, pulse pounding. She had stripped my access, shoved me out of the financial loop, and stuck me in a department where I could not see or touch anything related to the offset transactions. I walked straight to Brad's desk. He looked like he had been waiting for me. His hands shook slightly as he closed the folder and stood up. "Elena, can we talk outside?" he whispered. We stepped into the stairwell, where the cement walls muffled voices. His face was pale. He said quietly, "She is preparing something. Valerie is putting together a technical responsibility statement. She plans to make you sign it." "What kind of statement?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. "One that says you made the system changes, that you were experimenting with adjustments and accidentally caused inconsistencies in the books. If you sign it, you take the fall. If you refuse, she claims non-compliance during an audit." I felt my breath leave my lungs in a slow, controlled exhale. There is no universe where I will sign something like that. Brad's jaw tightened with fear. He said softly, "I told her that. I told her you would never agree. She told me to be persuasive." "I am not trying to persuade me," I said. "I am trying to save your job." I took a step closer. Brad, I am not afraid of losing a job. I am afraid of letting her rewrite reality. He closed his eyes as if bracing for something painful. Then she will come after you harder. I went back to my desk with my pulse ringing in my ears. I was still trying to steady my breathing when Valerie's assistant approached and said Valerie wanted to see me in her private conference room. The room was small, quiet, with frosted glass walls that carved off any escape. Valerie sat at the head of the table, one elbow resting on a stack of documents. Her expression was polished stone. Elena, we need to address your recent system activity. What activity? I asked calmly. You accessed administrator functions without authorization. You retrieved deleted emails. You viewed confidential material. All of this is traceable. That is not true. And even if it were, I have full forensic clearance. I was resolving discrepancies. Her eyes narrowed. You are not here to investigate. You're here to follow instructions. You have exceeded your role. I let silence sit between us. She wanted me defensive. She wanted me rattled. I would not give her that. Then her voice shifted, cracking just slightly around the edges. You need to understand, she said, that you are putting yourself in jeopardy. HR will be notified if you continue violating system boundaries. Jeopardy, boundaries, audit. Everything she said was a threat, not a warning. And beneath the threat, I saw something else. Panic. She was unraveling. Before I could respond, my phone vibrated in my pocket. I excused myself and stepped outside the room. It was a message from Daniel. Emergency. Come to server room. I walked quickly to the back hallway, where the temperature dropped and the hum of machines filled the air. Daniel met me at the doorway, face tense. He said she asked me to wipe the logs. All 18 months. Completely gone. Hard delete. My heart sank. What did you do? I asked. I stalled. I told her the system needed diagnostics, but she knows I can do it and she will push again. We cannot let her erase those logs, I whispered. Daniel swallowed hard. She is watching me now. If I refuse outright, she will remove me too. His fear was real. Valerie was tightening the noose on everyone who posed a risk. I walked out of the server room, not sure where I was going until I found myself outside, standing at the edge of the parking lot. Evening sunlight stretched low across the pavement, long in gold. The building behind me loomed taller than it ever had, its windows catching reflections of a sky that felt too calm for the chaos inside. Cars passed along the road in steady lines. Somewhere far off, a siren cried faintly before fading into the evening. I wrapped my arms around myself, trying to hold the pieces together long enough to think clearly. There was no way Valerie would stop. Not now. She would frame me if she could. She would wipe everything she had touched. She would keep Emily terrified. She would silence Daniel, and she would succeed unless someone else stepped in. I unlocked my phone with trembling hands and scrolled through my contacts. I paused at a name I hadn't seen in years. Carter Hill. FBI, Phoenix Field Office. I had met him at a forensic training in 2010, during a seminar on internal embezzlement cases. He once told the class that the hardest part of uncovering fraud was not finding the evidence. It was finding the courage to act on it. I stared at his name, feeling the weight of the decision forming inside me. My thumb hovered above the screen, the cold air biting at my fingers. I took a slow breath, the kind that steadies you right before you step into a storm you know you can't outrun. Then I pressed call. If this story touched you, please subscribe and let someone out there feel less alone. Thank you. Chapter 5. The Cleanup. I heard a familiar voice answer, steady and low, asking if I was safe and able to talk. I told him briefly what I had found, how long it had been happening, who was involved, and what I believed Valerie was preparing to erase. He did not react with surprise, only with the kind of quiet focus I remembered from a training room 15 years earlier. He asked for every detail I could recall, then instructed me to come to the Phoenix field office as soon as possible with all my evidence. I agreed before fear had the chance to interrupt me. I drove to Phoenix the next morning. The winter sun was still rising behind the desert ridges when I walked into the federal building, my encrypted drive tucked inside the inner pocket of my coat. Carter met me in a small interview room that smelt faintly of dust and old carpet. He looked a little older than I remembered, lines at the corners of his eyes, but his manner had not changed. He listened without interrupting while I explained the patterns, the shell vendors, the coerced entries, the revoked access, and the threats. When I handed him the drive, he examined it like a surgeon preparing for a delicate procedure. He told me that my documentation was more detailed than he expected, that timestamps manipulated through a dev tool were extremely valuable as evidence, and that the email draft outlining a valuation scheme was a direct link between internal fraud and the merger negotiations. I felt my throat tighten when he said they would need to move quickly. He warned me not to confront Valerie under any circumstances, not to mention the meeting to anyone at Ridgeline, and to stay out of the financial systems entirely. The next steps would be theirs, not mine. When I drove back to Boise, the highway shimmered with heat even in February, and I found myself gripping the steering wheel as though bracing for a collision I could not see yet. I followed Carter's instructions. I went to work. I kept my head down. I let Valerie believe she had sidelined me. For 3 days, nothing happened except whispers around the office about the incoming audit team and uneasy glances exchanged near the break room. Then on the morning the auditors arrived, everything shifted at once. I had barely logged into the project management system when 2 black federal SUVs pulled into the Ridgeline parking lot. At first, the employees assumed the auditors were arriving with extra support. People straightened their shirts, smoothened their hair, prepared to look competent. Then the first federal badge flashed near the door, followed by another. A security officer hurried to escort them inside. Conversations fell silent. Chairs stopped rolling, fingers hovered above keyboards. The agents walked straight toward the finance wing. I could feel the tension building like static under my skin. I stepped back from my desk as agents swept past me, purposeful and calm, their presence creating a sting of electricity in the air. They entered the conference room where Valerie had been setting up folders for the audit team. The door closed behind them. Through the small glass window, I saw her rise from her chair too quickly, her expression snapping from irritation to confusion to fear within a single breath. Minutes later, the internal auditors arrived. They were immediately redirected to a secondary room by the agents. Word spread through the office like a gust of wind. People gathered in small clusters, murmuring anxiously while pretending not to stare at the conference room door. No one dared ask me anything, though a few brave glances drifted in my direction, filled with suspicion and hope and something like relief. After several minutes, an agent stepped out and asked me to join the meeting. My knees felt weak as I entered the room. Valerie stood with both hands braced on the back of a chair, her face drained of color. Next to her sat the chief executive, Michael Carr, looking equally shaken, his tie askew, his shoulders slumped. On the table were printed pages. I recognized many of them instantly. Ledger snapshots, log reconstructions, my recovered emails, the draft that Daniel had found. Carter motioned for me to sit. He explained to the executives that a federal investigation had been opened regarding potential financial manipulation linked to the upcoming acquisition. He described the timestamps that had been altered, the deliberate misclassification of funds, and the pattern of coercion used to force subordinates into participating. He spoke calmly while Valerie's composure cracked like thin ice. She tried to protest, insisting that I had gone rogue, that I had accessed systems without permission, that I had hidden unauthorized activity to sabotage the company. She pointed at me with trembling hands, accusing me of manipulating logs myself. Her voice rose with every sentence, her breaths quickening. Carter placed a sheet of paper in front of her. It contained the sequence of commands she had issued through the dev tool. He placed another sheet showing her instructions sent to Daniel, requesting that he erase 18 months of logs. Then another showing the P.O. box addresses tied to a relative of hers in Utah. And finally, the email draft detailing her plan to inflate earnings before the sale. Her words faltered. Her voice cracked. She sank into the chair slowly, as though her bones could no longer hold her upright. They asked to speak with Emily afterward. She came into the room with her hands clasped tightly together. She admitted everything in a quiet, trembling voice: the late-night entries, the pressure, the threats. One of the agents nodded gently while she spoke, assuring her she would be protected. She looked at me only once, her eyes filled with a mixture of relief and guilt and gratitude. Daniel was next. His voice was stronger than Emily's, and he provided the technical evidence that supported the manipulated time zones. He was praised for refusing to delete the logs. Brad stood outside the door when Daniel and I stepped out, and when our eyes met, I saw the exhaustion of a man who had held secrets too heavy for too long. He let out a breath that seemed to deflate every muscle in his body. Later that afternoon, Michael Carr submitted his resignation. It was announced quietly, but everybody knew by then. By the end of the week, the parent company terminated the entire executive team connected to the irregularities and brought in an external firm to rebuild and monitor the financial systems. The tension that had gripped Ridgeline for months finally began to loosen. 2 weeks later, I received a formal offer from a financial oversight firm in Seattle, inviting me to lead a new fraud investigation unit. They said my documentation had displayed rare clarity and courage. When I read the offer, sitting alone at my kitchen table with the sun melting across the hardwood floor, I felt something settle inside me. A long overdue peace. I knew I did not do any of this to destroy Valerie or to prove anything to Ridgeline. I did it because people deserve honesty, because the truth matters, even when it threatens everything around it. Still, seeing Valerie exposed felt like justice choosing its own shape. On my last day at Ridgeline, I walked to the window near the stairwell, where the building overlooked the distant stretch of the Boise front foothills. The mountains rose in faint blue strokes beyond the city, quiet and steady, untouched by the chaos that had filled these rooms for so long. I rested my hand against the cool glass and breathed. This place had once represented hope and stability. Now it was simply a chapter I had survived. I gathered my things, shut off the light, and stepped outside into the cold air. The sky was a clear winter blue, the kind that makes every color sharper. As I crossed the parking lot for the last time, I felt a calm I had not felt in months. And if there is one thing I want anyone listening to hold on to, it is the quiet truth I learned in all of this. In a world full of shadows and shortcuts and people willing to bury the truth for convenience, honesty can feel like the hardest road, but it is never the wrong one. If you have ever been pressured to stay silent, if you have ever been told to look away from something you knew was wrong, remember this. You always have the right to stand up. You always have the right to choose what is real. And you always have the right to choose yourself. If this story held your attention or reminded you of your own battles, share your thoughts, your experiences, or simply stay with me for the next story. There is more to uncover, more to tell, and more truth waiting to be heard.